The Israeli military on Tuesday made a startling announcement that it had recovered the bodies of 6 hostages taken in Hamas's October 7th attack that started the war in Gaza. This came as US and Arab mediators tried to advance an agreement to halt the fighting and release other captives. The military said its forces recovered the bodies in an overnight operation in southern Gaza without saying when or how the 6 had died. A forum for hostage families said they were kidnapped alive. Hamas says some captives have been killed and wounded in Israeli airstrikes. The recovery is a blow to Hamas, which hopes to exchange hostages for Palestinian prisoners, an Israeli withdrawal from Gaza, and a lasting ceasefire. But it was also likely to increase pressure on Israel's government to reach a deal to release dozens of hostages who are still believed to be alive. The military said it had identified the remains. Meanwhile, Hamas is still believed to be holding around 110 hostages who were captured in the October 7th attack. Israeli authorities estimate around a third of them are dead. Blinken, who is on his 9th visit to the region since the start of the war, said on Monday that Netanyahu has accepted a proposal to bridge gaps in the ceasefire talks, which have dragged on for months, and called on Hamas to do the same. Hamas has accused the United States of embracing Israeli demands and trying to impose them on the militant group. There still appears to be a wide gap between the two sides, including Israel's demand for lasting control over 2 strategic corridors in Gaza, which Hamas has outrightly rejected. Let's explain why is Israel demanding control over 2 Gaza corridors in the ceasefire talks. Well, Israel's demand for lasting control over these 2 strategic corridors in Gaza threatens to unravel these ceasefire talks completely. Officials close to the negotiations have said Israel wants to maintain a military presence in a narrow buffer zone along the Gaza-Egypt border it calls the Philadelphi corridor, and in an area it carved out that cuts off northern Gaza from the south, known as the Netzarim corridor. Now, it's unclear if Israeli control of these corridors is included in a US-backed proposal that Secretary of State Antony Blinken has called on Hamas to accept to break an impasse in ceasefire talks. Blinken, who is back in the region this week, said on Monday that Israel had agreed to the proposal without saying what it really entails. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says control of the Egyptian border area is needed to prevent Hamas from replenishing its arsenal through smuggling tunnels, and that Israel needs a mechanism to prevent militants from returning to the north, which has been largely isolated since October. Hamas has rejected those demands, which were only made public in recent weeks. There was absolutely no mention of Israel retaining control of the corridors in earlier drafts of an evolving ceasefire proposal seen by the Associated Press. Now, Hamas says any lasting Israeli presence in Gaza would amount to military occupation. Egypt, which has served as a key mediator in the months-long talks, is also staunchly opposed to an Israeli presence on the other side of its border with Gaza. So what are the corridors and why does Israel want them? The Philadelphi corridor is a narrow strip, about 100 meters wide in parts, running the 14-kilometer length of the Gaza side of the border with Egypt. It includes the Rafah crossing, which until May was Gaza's only outlet to the outside world, not controlled by Israel. Israel says Hamas used a vast network of tunnels beneath the border to import arms, allowing it to build up the military machine it used in the October 7th attack that triggered the war. The military says it has found and destroyed dozens of tunnels since seizing the corridor in May. Egypt, on the other hand, rejects those allegations, saying it destroyed hundreds of tunnels on its side of border years ago and set up a military buffer zone of its own that prevents smuggling. Meanwhile, the roughly 6-kilometer long Netzarim corridor runs from the Israeli border to the coast just south of Gaza City, severing the territory's largest metropolitan area and the rest of the north from the south. Hamas has demanded that hundreds of thousands of Palestinians who fled the north should be allowed to return to their homes. Israel has agreed to their return but wants to ensure they are not armed. Now the question is, why are Hamas and Egypt opposed to Israeli control? Israeli control over either corridor would require closed roads, fences, guard towers, and other military installations. Checkpoints are among the most visible manifestations of Israel's open-ended military rule over the West Bank and over Gaza prior to its 2005 withdrawal. Israel says such checkpoints are needed for security, but Palestinians view them as a humiliating infringement on their daily life. They would also be seen by many Palestinians as a prelude to a lasting military occupation and the return of Jewish settlements, something Netanyahu's far-right coalition partners have openly called for. Hamas has demanded a total Israeli withdrawal and accuses Netanyahu of setting new conditions in order to sabotage the talks. Egypt says Israel's operations along the border threaten the landmark 1979 peace treaty between the two countries. Egypt has refused to open its side of the Rafah crossing until Israel returns the Gaza side to Palestinian control. Now, are these new demands by Israel? Well, Israel insists they are not, referring to them as now clarifications to an earlier proposal endorsed by President Joe Biden in the May 31st speech and by the UN Security Council in a rare ceasefire resolution. Israel also accuses Hamas of making new demands since then that it cannot accept. But neither the speech nor the Security Council resolution made any reference to Israel's demands regarding these corridors, which were only made public in recent weeks, and both refer to a complete withdrawal of Israeli forces. Now, the US has also said it is against any reoccupation of Gaza or reduction of its territory. Previous written drafts of the ceasefire proposal stipulate an initial Israeli withdrawal from populated and central areas during the first phase of the agreement, when the most vulnerable hostages would be freed and displaced Palestinians are allowed to return to the north. During the second phase, the specifics of which would be negotiated during the first, Israeli forces would withdraw completely and Hamas would release all remaining living hostages, including male soldiers. The most recent drafts of the proposal, including one that Hamas approved in principle on July 2nd, contain language specifying that displaced residents returning in the first phase must not carry any weapons. But they do not specify a mechanism for searching them. The United States, Qatar, and Egypt, which have spent months trying to broker an agreement, have not weighed in publicly on Israel's demands regarding these corridors. An Israeli delegation held talks with the Egyptian officials in Cairo on Sunday, focused on the Philadelphi corridor, but did not achieve a breakthrough. So what happens if these talks completely fail? Failure to reach a ceasefire deal would prolong a war in which Israel's offensive has already killed over 40,000 Palestinians. This is according to Gaza health officials. It has also displaced the vast majority of Gaza's 2.3 million residents and destroyed much of the impoverished territory. Palestinian militants are still holding some 110 hostages captured in the October 7 attack. Israel has only rescued 7 hostages through military operations. Around a third of the 110 are already dead, according to Israeli authorities, and the rest are at risk as the war grinds on. A ceasefire deal also offers the best chance of averting or at least delaying an Iranian or Hezbollah strike on Israel over last month's targeted killing of a Hezbollah commander in Beirut and a Hamas leader in Tehran. Israel has vowed to respond to any attack, and the United States has rushed military assets to the region, raising the prospect of an even wider and more devastating war. Do tell us what you think about this video in the comment section, and for more news updates, subscribe to India Today.